Most people believe that the secret to surviving a high-pressure moment is to calm the mind. They tell themselves to breathe, to relax, and to find a place of peace. But according to Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman to ever live, this is the exact reason why most people fail. Trying to force your mind to be calm when your heart is racing is like trying to stop a storm by waving your hands at the sky. It is a struggle against reality, and in that struggle, you lose your focus, your timing, and eventually your power. Musashi didn't teach his students to be calm. He taught them something far more dangerous to their enemies. He taught them how to be fixed. Real control under stress is not about the absence of emotion, but the presence of an immovable spirit. Most people hear this and think they understand, but they apply it with a heavy, rigid tension that shatters the moment things get difficult. They mistake being fixed for being frozen. If you seek stillness by tensing your muscles or holding your breath, you have already lost the battle. 400 years ago, a young samurai learned this lesson through a terrifying failure. He had perfect technique and a sharp blade, yet his hands froze the moment the steel was drawn. To understand why he failed, and how you are likely failing the same way today, we must look at the secret that finally unfroze his spirit. Your stress isn't a sword, but your brain treats it like one. When you feel that tightening in your chest before a difficult conversation, or that sharp flash of heat when a deadline approaches, your body is preparing for a physical kill or be killed encounter. Evolution hasn't caught up to the modern office or the digital world. To your nervous system, an angry email from a boss or a mounting pile of debt triggers the same ancient survival mechanisms as a blade held to your throat. You feel the same surge of adrenaline, the same narrowing of vision, and the same desperate urge to escape. The problem is that you are currently using the cowering spirit method to survive your daily life. Musashi described this state as a mind that has shrunk in the face of pressure. When you are overwhelmed, you stop looking at the big picture and start obsessing over tiny, terrifying details. You become reactive. You jump at every notification, you snap at those you love, and you feel as though you are constantly drowning in shallow water. You are fighting the storm instead of being the ship. This cowering spirit doesn't just make you unhappy, it makes you ineffective. It locks you in a cycle of panic where your decisions are made by fear rather than by your own will. We often think our modern problems are small compared to those of the past, but the internal reality is identical. The samurai faced a cold piece of steel. You face a deadline that could change your future. The consequences feel different, but the biology of the fear is exactly the same. The chemical cocktail flooding your veins right now is the same one that flooded the veins of warriors 4 centuries ago. If you can learn how they mastered that chemical surge to remain sharp and lethal, you can master your own day-to-day chaos. To see how this works in practice, we have to look at the story of a man who had everything to lose, and the master who showed him that his greatest enemy wasn't the man standing across from him, but the spirit hiding inside him. The master did not take Takashi back to the training hall. He did not ask him to pick up his sword or practice his footwork. Instead, he led the young samurai deep into the mountains, where a massive waterfall crashed against the jagged rocks below. The sound was deafening, a constant roar of white noise that made the heart race. The master pointed to a flat stone directly beneath the heaviest part of the freezing downpour. He commanded Takashi to strip to his waist and stand on that stone. He didn't tell him to fight the water or to push back against the current. He simply told him to stand there and be unaffected. At first, Takashi struggled. He tensed his muscles, bracing himself against the weight of the water. He tried to use his strength to hold his ground, but the more he resisted, the more the water battered him. His breath became shallow, his heart hammered against his ribs, and his mind was filled with a single, panicked thought. How much longer can I hold on? He was treating the waterfall like an enemy he had to defeat. He was meeting force with force, and because the waterfall was infinite and his muscles were not, he was losing. He was shivering not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion of trying to control something that could not be controlled. The master watched from the bank, his expression as still as a statue. "You are trying to be a wall," the master shouted over the roar. "A wall eventually cracks and falls. The water is not your enemy. The water is simply moving. You are failing because you are inviting the water to hit you." Takashi closed his eyes. He realized that his stress, the freezing cold and the crushing weight, wasn't coming from the water itself, but from his own resistance to it. He began to learn what Musashi calls the fluid mind. He stopped tensing. He let his shoulders drop. He stopped trying to block the sensation of the cold and simply allowed it to exist. Slowly, a strange transformation occurred. He stopped feeling like he was being hit. Because he was no longer pushing back, the water began to flow over him rather than against him. It moved across his skin and fell to the rocks below, but it no longer moved his spirit. He remained fixed in his position, but his mind was as fluid as the stream. In this state of the fluid mind, stress loses its grip. When you are in a high-pressure situation, the water is the criticism of others, the fear of failure, or the ticking of the clock. Most people stick to these things. They catch the stress and hold on to it, letting it build up until they break. But a mind trained in the water book learns to let stress flow through without sticking. You acknowledge the pressure, you feel the weight of the moment, but you don't grab onto it. You remain broad and straight, as Musashi wrote. You don't become small or agitated. You simply let the moment pass over you while you remain centered on what needs to be done. As the hours passed, Takashi's shivering stopped. His mind became incredibly clear. He could hear individual drops of water hitting the pool, even amidst the roar. He could feel the texture of the stone beneath his feet. He wasn't calm in the way people usually mean. His body was under intense physical strain, but his spirit was undisturbed. He had found the normal mind in the middle of a crisis. He realized that the secret to control wasn't about changing the environment or stopping the waterfall. It was about changing his relationship to the pressure. This led him to a profound realization that would change the way he fought forever. You don't fight the stress, you become the container for it. When you are a small, rigid cup, a little bit of turbulence overflows you. But when you become like a vast lake, you can receive a giant stone without the surface ever losing its overall stillness. The stone sinks, the ripples fade, but the lake remains the lake. Takashi stood under the waterfall not as a victim of the water, but as the space through which the water moved. However, standing still in a waterfall is one thing. Maintaining that fluidity when a blade is moving toward your throat is another. To bridge the gap between philosophy and survival, Takashi had to learn a specific mental shift, a way to move his focus so fast that fear couldn't keep up. This was the training that would take him from a student who could survive a waterfall to a warrior who could dominate a battlefield. To master this, he would have to learn the secret of the rat and the ox. To master your mind under stress, you must learn a specific type of mental flexibility that Musashi called the rat-ox shift. Most people fail because their focus is brittle. When a problem arises, they get stuck. They zoom in so closely on the threat that they lose sight of everything else. Musashi taught that a true warrior must be able to jump between the small and the large instantly. He taught that you must have the ability to see the tiny details of a fly's wing while simultaneously sensing the entire forest around you. The master led Takashi to a small garden. In the center of the garden was a wooden post with a tiny red dot painted on it. "Focus on the dot," the master commanded. Takashi stared. He narrowed his eyes, concentrating all his willpower on that single red mark. As he did, the rest of the garden began to blur. He could no longer see the trees, the path, or even the master standing beside him. He was locked in. "Now," the master said, "while keeping your eyes on the tell me how many birds are in the trees behind you. Tell me the color of the clouds. Tell me the distance to the gate." Takashi couldn't answer. By focusing so hard on the rat, the tiny detail, his mind had become blind to the ox, the big picture. This is exactly what happens to you during a stressful day. You get a critical comment from a coworker, and that comment becomes your red. You replay it in your head. You obsess over the tone of their voice. You zoom in closer and closer until your entire world is just that one tiny point of pain. While you are staring at the rat, the rest of your life, your health, your goals, your peace of mind, is being ignored. The master explained that this is the loop of worry. When you stay in the rat's mind, you are trapped in a small space. You feel claustrophobic and panicked because you have no perspective. To break this loop, you must perform the ox's shift. You must consciously force your mind to zoom out to the ox's neck. You keep the problem in your field of vision, but you expand your awareness to include the entire horizon. When you are entangled in the small things, the master said, you must suddenly change to the big things. If the enemy is thinking of something small, you must think of something large. This is how you prevent your spirit from being captured. Takashi practiced this for days. He would focus on the tip of his sword, the rat, and then instantly expand his awareness to the entire mountain range, the ox. He learned that he didn't have to stop looking at the problem to find peace. He just had to stop being consumed by it. He learned to see his stress as just one small red dot in a very large garden. By doing this, the stress lost its power to paralyze him. He was no longer entangled. This mental jumping is the secret to peripheral sovereignty. It allows you to stay grounded. When you are in a high-pressure meeting, the rat is the difficult question you were just asked. If you stay there, you will stutter and panic. But if you shift to the ox, you remember your years of experience, the ultimate goal of the project, and the fact that this moment is just 1 second in a long career. Suddenly, the question doesn't feel like a life-threatening attack. It feels like a small detail that you can easily handle. As Takashi mastered this shift, his vision changed. He was no longer looking at the world through a straw. He was seeing the totality of the moment. He realized that the master wasn't just teaching him how to look at things, but how to perceive them. In the Water Book, Musashi says you must make your perception strong and your sight weak. You see the enemy's heart and intent, the large, while barely noticing the movement of his hands, the small. By the end of the week, Takashi felt a strange sensation. The mountain, which used to feel far away and intimidating, now felt as close as his own hand. The red dot, which used to feel overwhelming, now felt like a tiny, insignificant speck. For the first time, Takashi saw the distant as if it were close. He had developed the gaze of the strategist. But having a broad mind is only useful if you can apply it when the stakes are at their highest. It is one thing to look at a red dot in a garden. It is quite another to use that gaze when your life is on the line. To prove that Takashi had truly moved beyond the cowering spirit, the master prepared one final, dangerous test. A test that would force Takashi to prove that his mind could remain fixed even when the world turned into a blur of violence. To survive, he would have to use everything he had learned about the water and the fire. It is easy to hear these stories and think they are just legends from a simpler time. But modern neuroscience has discovered that what happens in your brain during a stressful moment is exactly what Musashi described in his writings 400 years ago. Scientists today call it the amygdala hijack. This is the moment when the emotional part of your brain takes over, shutting down your logic and forcing you into a state of panic. Musashi had his own name for this loss of control. He called it the spirit of the wind. In his Wind book, he explains that when a warrior spirit is caught by the wind, it becomes scattered, restless, and weak. Your brain's survival center is the wind, and it is currently blowing your focus in 1,000 different directions, making it impossible for you to find your center. This is the point where most modern advice fails you. You are told to think positive or count to 10, but Musashi explains in the Wind book why these other methods fall short. He argues that most schools of strategy focus too much on outward show. They focus on flashy techniques or fast movements rather than the internal spirit. If you try to use logic to talk yourself out of a panic attack, you are using the wrong tool for the job. You are trying to use the slow, thinking part of your brain to fight the lightning-fast emotional part. Musashi knew that once your spirit is agitated, no amount of superficial, positive thinking will save you. You cannot fix a scattered spirit by adding more thoughts to it. You can only fix it by returning to the normal mind. The reason Musashi's methods work where others fail is because they are grounded in the way of strategy, which is really just a manual for human biology. When Musashi tells you to maintain a fixed spirit, he is teaching you how to keep your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, online even when the amygdala is screaming. When he teaches the rat-ox shift, he is showing you how to manually override your brain's tendency to zoom in on threats. This isn't just mindfulness or philosophy, it is ancient survival biology. It is a system designed to keep a human being functional while their internal alarm system is going off. Musashi's authority doesn't come from being a monk in a quiet temple. It comes from 61 life-or-death duels where he never lost. He didn't survive because he was the strongest, but because he understood the mechanics of fear better than his opponents. He knew that the person who loses their mind first is the one who dies. By applying the water spirit and the rat-ox shift, he was essentially hacking his own nervous system to stay sharp while everyone else was drowning in adrenaline. Now that you understand that this power is built into your own biology, you are ready to see how it looks in action. It is time to transition from the theory of the garden to the reality of the sword. The master knew that Takashi understood the concepts in his head, but he needed to know if Takashi's body would remember them when death was standing inches away. This leads us to the most dangerous moment of Takashi's life, the test of the blind duel, where he would have to prove that his mind was truly his own. The morning of the final test was silent. The air was thick with mist, and the sun had not yet cleared the horizon. The master led Takashi to the center of the training grounds, but there were no wooden swords today. Instead, the master produced a thick, black silk cloth. Without a word, he tied it around Takashi's eyes, plunging the young samurai into total darkness. This was the final test. Takashi had to face an opponent while internalizing the gaze. In the water book, Musashi says that the eyes of the heart are more important than the eyes in your head. When you are under extreme stress, your physical sight often betrays you. It flinches, it narrows, and it panics. To truly control his mind, Takashi had to stop looking with his eyes and start perceiving with his spirit. "The enemy is already here," the master whispered, his voice fading into the mist. Takashi stood alone in the blackness. Every sound became a threat. The rustle of a leaf felt like a footstep. The whistle of the wind felt like the swing of a blade. His heart began to race. The spirit of the wind was trying to scatter his focus. He felt the familiar urge to tense his muscles, to cower within his own mind. But then, he remembered the waterfall. He let his shoulders drop. He stopped fighting the darkness and became the container for it. He expanded his awareness from the rat, the fear in his chest, to the ox, the entire space of the courtyard. Suddenly, he felt a shift in the air to his left. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure. In the fire book, Musashi talks about the mountain-sea change. This is the moment of peak stress where the rhythm of the conflict shifts. If the enemy attacks like a mountain, heavy and immovable, you must become the sea, fluid and overwhelming. If the enemy is like the sea, you must be the mountain. Takashi's opponent moved with a sudden, explosive speed, swinging a bamboo sword toward his flank. In that split second, Takashi felt the mountain of the attack coming at him. His old self would have panicked and tried to jump away, but his new mind remained fixed. He didn't react to the sword, he reacted to the intent behind the sword. He performed the mountain-sea change. As the attack came in heavy and hard, Takashi became the sea. He didn't block, he simply stepped into the attack's empty space, letting the force of the blow flow past him just like the water in the mountain stream. The opponent turned and unleashed a flurry of strikes. The noise was constant, a storm of wood whistling through the air. Takashi remained in the fluid mind. He was perceiving the distant as if it were close. Even though he couldn't see the bamboo blade, he could see the opponent's rhythm. He was no longer entangled in the fear of being hit. He was simply moving within the void. Then came the deciding moment. The opponent grew frustrated. He slowed down for a fraction of a second, gathering his strength for one final, massive strike. This was the rat moment, the tiny opening. Takashi didn't wait. He didn't rush. He simply leaned forward. He didn't win by being faster. He didn't win because he was stronger or because he had better eyesight. In fact, he couldn't see at all. He won because his mind didn't move. While the opponent's spirit was agitated, jumping from hope to frustration to anger, Takashi's spirit remained broad and straight. He was fixed while his enemy was scattered. He placed the tip of his practice sword against the opponent's chest before the final blow could even begin. The courtyard went silent. Takashi reached up and untied the silk cloth. The world rushed back in. The light, the trees, the master's calm face. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't shaking. He had survived the high-stakes test not by defeating an enemy, but by mastering the stress within himself. The master nodded slowly. "You have learned that the sword is just an extension of the mind," he said. "But the world outside this garden is not made of bamboo and silk. It is made of ego, pride, and invisible conflicts." Takashi had mastered the gaze in a duel, but now he had to learn how to carry this power into the everyday world, where the battles are fought without weapons, but the wounds are just as deep. This was the shift from the warrior's art to the art of living. To do this, he would have to learn how to face a conflict where the enemy wasn't a man with a sword, but a world that refuses to be quiet. The lessons Takashi learned in the mountains and on the training grounds were never meant to stay there. Musashi's strategy is not a martial art in the way we think of sports today. It is a way of existing in a world that is constantly trying to pull you out of your center. You can apply the rat ox shift the very next time you find yourself in a high-pressure meeting or a heated argument. When someone attacks your ideas or speaks to you with disrespect, your natural instinct is to zoom in on the rat, the insult, the tone of their voice, or the fear of looking stupid in front of others. Your world shrinks until all you can see is that one person's face and your own rising anger. To use the shift, you must consciously zoom out to the ox. Look at the room. Remember the long-term goal of the project. Realize that this argument is a tiny speck in the span of your entire life. By moving your mind to the large, the person attacking you suddenly looks small. You regain your peripheral sovereignty, and instead of reacting with heat, you can respond with the cold, clear precision of a strategist. To maintain this ability, you must practice what we call the daily water-bearing ritual. You don't need a waterfall to do this. You simply need the mundane stresses of your morning. When you are stuck in traffic, or when your computer lags, or when you are rushing to get ready, notice the moment your spirit begins to cower or become agitated. Instead of huffing with frustration or tensing your grip on the steering wheel, practice the water spirit. Drop your shoulders. Breathe normally. Let the frustration flow over you without sticking to your skin. Treat the traffic jam exactly like Takashi treated the cold water. It is an environment, not an enemy. If you can stay unaffected by a slow elevator, you are training the muscles you will need when a real crisis hits. Musashi also speaks of a technique called treading down. In the Fire book, he explains that you must crush the enemy's spirit the moment it flickers to life. You can apply this internally to your own panic. The moment you feel that first spark of anxiety, the fluttering in your stomach or the cowering spirit taking hold, you must tread it down instantly. Do not wait for the panic to grow. Do not negotiate with it. The second you notice the stress, use your perception to see it for what it is, a biological reaction. By acknowledging it immediately and returning to your normal mind, you cut the legs out from under the stress before it can run away with your logic. By integrating these small rituals into your daily life, you stop being a victim of your circumstances. You begin to move through the modern world with the quiet, heavy presence of a master. You aren't avoiding stress, you are dominating it. But there is one final level of mastery that goes beyond techniques and shifts. It is the highest peak of Musashi's mountain, a place where the struggle itself disappears. Takashi had learned how to manage the water and how to shift between the rat and the ox, but he still felt like a man trying to be a warrior. The final revelation would show him that as long as there is someone trying to control the mind is not yet truly free. To find the ultimate secret of control under stress, we must enter the final chapter of the 5 rings, the mystery of the void. After all the training, the waterfalls, and the mental shifts, we arrive at the final peak of Musashi's mountain, the Book of the Void. This is the ultimate secret of controlling the mind under stress, and it is the hardest to explain because it is about something that isn't there. For most people, control feels like a struggle. It feels like a person, the self, trying to grab onto a thought, the stress. But in the void, there is no struggle because there is no one left to fight. The master sat with Takashi one last time. He explained that as long as you think, I am stressed, or I must stay calm, you are still trapped in the world of conflict. You have created a self that is separate from the moment, and that self is vulnerable. True control, the kind that makes a warrior invincible, happens when there is no self to be stressed. When you stop worrying about your ego, your reputation, or your safety, the barrier between you and the world disappears. You don't handle the situation. You simply are the situation. In this state, your mind is like a mirror. A mirror doesn't get stressed when it reflects a fire. It simply shows the fire. When the fire goes away, the mirror remains empty and clear. This is the power of the void. It is a state of nothingness, where your spirit is so vast that no amount of pressure can fill it. You act with perfect spontaneity because there is no doubt or fear to slow you down. Musashi ends his life's work with these powerful words: "In the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness." By reaching this level, you realize that stress was never a monster coming to get you. It was just a shadow that only had power because you were standing in its way. When you become the void, the shadow has nowhere to land. But the journey of the 5 rings does not end on a mountaintop. It ends exactly where it began, in your everyday life, in the middle of the noise and the chaos. To truly honor the way of strategy, we must see how the story of Takashi ends, and how his transformation becomes your own path forward. The master has given us the map. Now, we must take the final step. Takashi walked back down the mountain and returned to the world of men, but the world no longer shook him. The noise of the village, the demands of his peers, and the uncertainty of the future were all still there, but they no longer felt like heavy chains around his spirit. He had learned that the secret to controlling the mind under stress wasn't about building a wall to hide behind. It was about becoming like the mountain, unmoved by the wind, and like the water, flowing through every obstacle without losing its essence. He was no longer a man reacting to life. He was a strategist moving through it. As you reflect on Takashi's journey, you must realize that the path of the 5 rings is open to those who stop trying to control. Most people spend their entire lives in a state of mental tension, trying to grip their thoughts and force their emotions into submission. They think that if they just try harder, they will finally find peace. But Musashi's greatest lesson is that control is found in letting go of the struggle. When you stop trying to force the water to be still, it becomes still on its own. When you stop obsessing over the rat of your daily worries, the ox of your true potential finally comes into view. This isn't a technique you use once and then forget. It is a way of being that you carry into every conversation, every task, and every moment of pressure. The transformation you seek doesn't require you to move to a mountain or carry a sword. It requires you to change your spirit right where you are. Whether you are facing a corporate boardroom, a difficult family situation, or the internal battle of your own anxiety, the principles remain the same. Maintain the water spirit. Practice the rat-ox shift. Tread down the sparks of panic before they become a fire. By doing this, you are not just surviving stress, you are using it as the fuel for your own mastery. You are turning the chaos of modern life into a training ground for your spirit. Musashi often said that the brush and the sword are one. He meant that the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. If you can master your mind while washing a dish or walking down the street, you can master your mind when your life is falling apart. There is no distinction between the warrior and the person. There is only the way. The techniques we have discussed today are the tools, but you are the craftsman. Now that you have the knowledge, the only thing left is the practice. If this philosophy resonated with you, it is a sign that your spirit is ready for the fixed mind. Do not let this be another video you simply watch and forget. Take one technique, the water bearing or the Radox shift, and apply it to one stressful moment tomorrow. See how it feels to let the water flow over you. See how it feels to zoom out and see the big picture. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the journey of a master begins with a single breath. If you found value in these ancient secrets, consider subscribing to join our community of modern strategists. We explore the depths of ancient wisdom to find the keys to modern power. Like this video to help others find their center in the storm, and leave a comment below telling us which of Musashi's principles you need most in your life right now. The broom is waiting, the sword is ready, and the path is open. Until next time, stay fixed, stay fluid, and remember, in the void, there is no limit to what you can become.